I'm John Kelbley. I'm the public sector lead for Windows Virtual Desktop here at Microsoft. So working with a lot of DoD, civilian intelligence, and also SLG, state and local government customers around Windows Virtual Desktop. And really what we've been doing around COVID and enabling secure work from home. And I've got Mark and Jason with me as well to provide some additional perspective as we kind of pivot through some of these materials. Like I said, I've been crazy busy, as has Mark and Jason, over the last several months, actually since, gosh, last February, because work from anywhere matters a lot. COVID has changed a lot of how we work. We anticipate unforeseen events are going to continue, whether it be snowstorms or other things going on within Texas, for example, people losing power, all those crazy things. And we think that flexibility and agility are kind of the new norm. And I may actually cut my video because I think I'm having a bandwidth challenge, if that's okay. So the industry watchers like Gartner, they believe that this is a very important thing as well, the work from home, work from anywhere piece. And they think that desktop virtualization is a great way to deliver all that, believing that the desktop virtualization cases are going to be based on business continuity going forward for many years. What we saw in this COVID era for secure remote work was really that a lot of organizations tried to ramp up things like VPNs and find laptops for everybody, or try to even leverage BYOD scenarios so that people could use any device. But the problem with VPNs has been it really requires a great deal of networking gear in your data center that costs money to scale up. And ultimately, it's not a great solution because it allows data and files to leak out to remote devices. People fire up a VPN and it provides a pathway into the chewy center of your organization rather than protecting and continuing to protect the crunchy outside. And VDI on premises certainly can help secure that data by blocking things like clipboard access or file access to secure your data. But it is an even higher cost because while it includes still those networking costs, you still also then need capital to provide compute and then storage because you're centralizing all the storage guys talk about IOPS, all the IOs per second from thousands of laptops now into a couple of racks in your data center, which can be very expensive. Plus, of course, then there's licensing challenges too for some of the technology that you're going to need. And either way, if you scale up your infrastructure, VPN concentrators or SANs and compute leave you with a bunch of stuff post-COVID that you don't want and leaves you locked into an architecture for years that you designed or set up out of desperation to provide effective work for your end users. What we saw as an alternative was really leveraging cloud-based solutions to provide flexible capacity for end users, and Microsoft Windows Virtual Desktop was really the foundation for that for a lot of organizations. It provided and does provide secure access to applications for internet-connected users that's built upon the Microsoft licensing that you may already have. What does that mean? A lot of federal agencies and state and local government entities already have Microsoft 365 licensing. And because of the way we structured Windows Virtual Desktop, they can turn stuff on in Azure and only pay for the compute. They don't have all of the extra cost associated with licensing protocols or management tools or other pieces. And a lot of times organizations have already gone through their security review for Office 365. And WVD uses the same Azure Active Directory security infrastructure that agencies are already using to get into their mail and SharePoint Online and some of those other pieces. So that security review that people went through to get access to cloud or to move and transition to cloud-based mail and other services that integrates with Azure MFA or third-party MFA, including PIV or CAC cards, is all there and can be leveraged to provide these desktop access to desktop services. And it's FedRAMP accredited as FedRAMP High, both in Azure Commercial, which is connected to GCC-based Office 365 deployments, Or Azure Government, which also has FedRAMP High, but also just received IL4 and IL5. And Karina pointed that out, I think, on the accreditation page that was there. That means that DoD customers can do deployments as well. And ultimately, the value is not about the accreditation, but it's really around the fact that we can pretty much run any application in Azure that runs on Windows, even Linux. I'll show you that maybe, and provide it securely to end users with multi-factor authentication in front of it, allowing you to centralize and consolidate some of those specialized resources and do cost modeling, provide secure access to either single workstations, multi-user workstations, and shut it down at night if you don't want to use it. Something you can't really do with a VDI infrastructure or VPN infrastructure on premises. So what can you do? As I mentioned, I can publish applications from Azure to Windows 10 or Windows 7, Mac clients, iOS devices, be they iPads or iPhones, Android devices, or any HTML5 compatible browser. And I can use different VM types to meet different performance requirements or criteria. So if I need, for example, GPUs, I can run VMs in Azure and fire them up to provide that access. Ultimately, the login experience is what customers and users have already seen logging into Office 365. They just authenticate to Azure Active Directory like they would going to portal.office.com. And like I said, we can provide, and this is just a screen cap of the client, and I'll actually show you the client in a minute. I can provide access to lower performance apps without GPUs, for example, for cost management purposes. Not that anybody really needs access to Paint from a secure environment, but I can also provide either individual application access or full desktop access through this client using Azure Active Directory and multi-factor authentication to users as well if they have higher performance requirements. What we saw here in the COVID era was what a lot of customers wanted to do was not necessarily provide a full desktop, but in some instances just give end users access to the Outlook client on any platform. So this is just an example of how if you had an iPad, you could provide somebody full access to the Outlook client that they're used to using on their desktop, but on an iPad without the weight of a full desktop experience. I have huge thumbs. I don't want a start button on my iPad to allow me to click into my desktop to get to Outlook. I just want Outlook. The benefit of doing this is that I can provide Outlook on any of those devices. And when the user disconnects, nothing persists, right? So I don't have any residual emails living in their mail client, if that makes sense. I can also publish to, as I said, an iPhone. And I can publish not only that Outlook client, which probably doesn't have a lot of utility on a little iPhone, although iPhones keep getting bigger, but provide access to applications. So I had one agency I was working with that had a timekeeping app that only ran with Internet Explorer. And during the COVID period, users weren't going into work. So they had a choice. They either needed to provide incremental VPN access so that people could use IE to get into their timekeeping app, or they could use WVD to publish Internet Explorer securely from their network behind MFA to virtually any device. And that's what they chose because they could do it super quickly, if that makes sense. Now, I see there's a couple of questions in the IM window. I don't know if we have a chance to answer those or if somebody wants to pop on and chat through that as I continue to talk, but feel free, Jason or anybody to go ahead and answer any of those questions if you can see it. I can't see them in the chat. I'll mention, though, that the prerequisites from a licensing perspective are really around taking advantage of that Office 365 licensing. If you've got M365, E3 or G3 or better, you're good to go. We're not going to have any other licensing requirements for you. If you don't, and you've got Windows software assurance, you can take advantage of this as well. Or if you've got VDA per user, what it really means is you can deploy operating systems in Azure for remote desktop session experiences with either Windows Server to provide those super cost-effective, high-density session-based deployments, or Windows Client, which is kind of a high-fidelity experience. If you've got Windows 7 apps, for example, where you need extended security updates, you can deploy those in Azure without incremental licensing costs and get the updates because it's running in Azure. or Windows 10 Enterprise Single Session, or a special Azure-only version of Windows called Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session. These 3 client operating system options are the most popular, with Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session being by far the most popular, about 80+% of what we see deployed in Azure for the hundreds of thousands of folks that use the service. This allows you to get server-like density, and it's an Azure-only version of Windows Server or Windows client that's available, but Windows 10 client fidelity. You get that rich client experience from Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session there. So I can use one operating system, put 5 or 10 or 20 or more users on a VM to get those economies of scale, manage that one VM, not have to pay for an RDS cal or other software, and just take advantage of my M365 licensing, if that makes sense. So what I also want to point out before we get too far along is around the accreditation. So in Azure Commercial, for those of you who are in civilian agencies, it does have FedRAMP High, DoD Impact Level 2 accreditation. And that would be compatible with what you would deploy for a GCC Office 365 environment. For those of you who are GCC High, you can deploy in Azure Government, which also has FedRAMP High accreditation, and DoD IL2, 4, or even IL5, which requires that you're on dedicated hardware, but that's just a deployment detail that you need to go through. You can also deploy if you're a DoD agency in the DoD regions that provide you that isolation by default. It would be connected to your Azure Government environment from a publishing perspective. And for those of you who are interested in secret or top secret, the deployments for those are in process right now with Azure Gov Secret. Actually, the stuff's there. It's just a matter of a little more work we got to do to get it all accredited and make it available to agencies that can take advantage of it. The architecture for Windows Virtual Desktop is based on the protocol, the RDP protocol that Microsoft has and has had as a remote desktop experience forever. But we've got, well, not forever, for many, many years, but we've got binary clients for, as I mentioned, the Mac, Windows, iOS, and Android, as well as an HTML5 web access capability that's there for you. But the clients that we use, we've adjusted because they authenticate against Azure Active Directory to make the desktops and apps that you publish out of your Azure environment accessible to people. So users authenticate using Azure Active Directory to get access to the resources that they have. In between your secure environment where the desktops and apps are published and the VMs are participating in your Active Directory is a Microsoft managed infrastructure to provide that web access, the gateway roles, the connection broker, and to house some of the diagnostics. You don't pay for this. In a traditional VDI deployment on premises, this would be extra stuff you'd have to buy hardware to deploy. Similar to what we do with portal.office.com, the web infrastructure used to get into your mail, this is no additional cost. So when a user connects in from their desktop, they put in their Azure Active Directory email address. It connects them to the gateway service. And when they double click on a resource that's been published to them, it goes to the broker. The broker finds either a desktop or the apps that they wanted to access that are participating in an Active Directory. And then it calls back out securely to the end user, providing them with access to those services. So what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to show you what this looks like, if that's okay. And what I've got here, and I'll minimize this browser session, is the Windows client remote desktop, excuse me, that I've logged into, and I'm doing this in Azure Government. So what I've actually got here are a group of applications that I've published, including even a Linux desktop that I'm publishing out using XRDP. Happy to share with you the details on that. Feel free to email me if you want to know what I did here. But I can publish out full desktops, a Windows 7 desktop, a shared pool desktop, taking advantage of that Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session operating system where I can put, like I said, 5, 10, or 20 or more users on an individual virtual machine. A personal dedicated desktop where when the user logs in the first time, they're assigned that desktop and they get to keep it for as long as we want them to, and they'll always go back to that same VM. This is the sort of deployment or use case that we would see for developers, or in some environments where users need a local administrative, local admin rights to do software installs, or if I need a single VM or single user experience to use something, say like Zscaler. I can also provide end users with GPU access. So for high performance workloads, those that might require a graphics processing unit, say Esri, for example, or engineering apps from Bentley or somebody like that, I can provide people with GPU access that can be shared in this or dedicated to an individual user. In this case, I've got a pooled desktop that's available here. These are all individual applications that I'm publishing. So I've actually fired up a couple of these to begin with, one being FreeCAD. Now, I live up in Connecticut, and I'm showing you a virtual desktop experience that's running down in our Virginia government data center. And you can see, and this is all delivered to me via RDP, you can see that the experience is great. And I live in Connecticut. It's not modern times in Connecticut. We have septic tanks and wells and all these other things. And I'm just using my home bandwidth with all the kids learning from home, and I'm getting a great experience from this individual application. I want to point out that it's a super high fidelity experience, totally integrated with my Windows client. So I get a thumbnail. Not just that, but when I logged into Azure Active Directory and personalized this client, it added the applications to my start menu. So I'm able to pin them to my taskbar in my start menu so that I could, as an end user, not even know that the application isn't running locally. I can put a shortcut on my desktop and get into these various applications. And I can do that for a variety of things, including, for example, here's Outlook, and I'll mention Teams as well. So we've done some really amazing optimizations in this COVID era for Teams to support secure mobile work around optimizing the call flow for things like Teams, and more federal agencies are adopting it. What I've got here is a Teams client that's actually running in Virginia, and I'm in Connecticut, and I've configured it for media optimization, which means that if I were to make a call from this Teams client, even though it's running in Virginia, it's going to take advantage of the networking stack on my computer. If I called somebody else in Connecticut, it's going to have the actual IP flow of the call stay local in Connecticut. It's not going to push it back up the wire to Virginia and then call someone in Connecticut. So we've optimized Teams and even worked with folks like Zoom to do similar optimizations on their clients. And that's all part of running the rich Windows client. I've got other options if I want to log in as well. I don't need to have a persistent client on my computer. I can instead just use a web browser. So I'm going to a well-known URL to get into my Azure Gov environment, and you can see I've got the exact same applications available to me right here. So I've got Esri Earth, Excel, FreeCAD, all these different applications that I'm publishing, as well as full desktops that if I want to get into them, available in the web experience. To get into any of these, it's just a double click, hit allow. I have a secondary authentication because I logged into Azure Active Directory to get the resources published to me. The secondary authentication that I'm going to see here is going to be for me to get into Active Directory. I'm logging into a virtual machine in Azure, even though I double clicked on an individual application. And with that application has a browser and some other things that are available to me. So now I've opened up a browser session in a browser in Azure. I know it's crazy, but the important thing here is to point out that this is on my secure network in Azure. Yes, it has internet access, but if I had agency data connected to it, it would be totally secured and available to my user after going through all of the Azure Active Directory type authentication, if that makes sense. And to point out that it is actually in Azure, what I'll do is I'll run speed test. This is kind of funny. Like I said, oops, I went to the wrong speed test. Silly me. Let me do that again. Or is it speedtest.net? I think it's speedtest.net. Silly me. And if I run speed test and I'm in a browser within a browser, what it's going to point out is that I certainly am not running this at home. So the performance that I'm seeing running speed test in this browser session in Azure Government is because I've got the full connectivity of Azure available to me in my virtual machine. So I'm getting gigabit speed in my browser, within my browser down in Virginia, even though I live in Connecticut. So just wanted to point that out, that having the full connectivity of Microsoft's cloud available to my users has an awful lot of benefit. That's what the user experience looks like. I want to show you the administrative experience just real quick. I know I'm moving pretty fast here. In order to provision up what I've shown you here, all I did was I went into my Microsoft Azure Government portal, clicked or typed Windows Virtual Desktop in the search bar, and then popped into it. What I did to provision all this up was I created host pools, and please ignore these. These are just for tests. I configured up a bunch of host pools that have these various applications and things that are provisioned up. So I've got some application groups that are set up in my host pools, and that's how I publish the various individual applications like Excel and Teams and some of the things that we saw. All I have to do when I create these application groups is assign them to users. So in this case, I've got an Azure Active Directory group for all of my users, my WVD users that's available to me. So everybody in my group that uses WVD has access to all of the Office suite on some relatively low-cost virtual machines. Alternatively, what I've got is another application group called HPC apps that's on a more expensive set of VMs. I've assigned those applications, like that CAD application, to a different subset of users, those that are in a group called WVD Additional Apps. This is just an Active Directory group that I've provisioned down on my domain controller on premises that's synced up to Azure Active Directory using AD Connect, and I have a smaller subset of users, and that's how I provide access to those applications. To provision up these application groups, it's pretty straightforward, and to publish an application, it's even easier. So I've got virtual machine images that I've configured in Azure. If I want to publish out one of these individual applications, I can simply go to this application piece or this application group and hit add. Any application that's in my image that's been provisioned into my pool that's on the start menu, I can go ahead and publish out to my users. So in this case, all of these applications I could go ahead and publish. I'm going to publish 7-Zip Manager, a critical enterprise application for my users to access. So it's been added. If I go back to my client and I hit refresh, as if I had just logged into the client, what we'll see in a couple of seconds is really that 7-Zip Manager is now available. It's really that easy to publish applications. I'll also add that there's a new capability for publishing apps that you may have seen when I went through this called MSIX package. MSIX app attach is kind of the new application publishing package format that we're leveraging that allows you to encapsulate applications into a VHD, a virtual disk file, put them on a file share, and you can publish those. So you don't have to do as much from an image management perspective. It's kind of an app layering technology that the industry is embracing, and it's something that is in preview right now in Azure Commercial and available to you coming shortly. I'm not going to show you, just in the interest of time, how I would publish a host pool, except to show you just the user interface to do that and make a couple of points. So I'm going to create, well, I'm not going to create, I'm going to just walk through creating the initial pieces of a host pool in Azure to point out that I can create personal VMs if I want to, the compute behind it all. Those are going to be VMs that would be assigned one-to-one to users, either directly or automatically when the user first logs in, or pooled VMs. This allows me to, again, take those advantage of those economic benefits of putting multiple users on a single VM. And I can set a maximum number of concurrent users on virtual machines, as well as set a load balancing algorithm to either peanut butter all the users around my environment, breadth first or depth first. And when I go to add these VMs, I give it a name, and this is a prefix that I'm going to use to provision all my VMs up. This will be the VM name in Azure, and it'll be Meetup dash a number, right? So if I say I wanted 3 VMs, it would be Meetup -0 through Meetup -2. And I can select the VM size that I want to provision up. So this is where I can identify some of those characteristics of different VMs I might want, whether I want GPUs or multiple cores or a certain amount of memory, depending on the workload. And then I select an image. If I have one I want to upload, if I have a Windows 10 enterprise image that I want to upload for those personal VMs, I could do that, put it in a storage blob and do that. Or I can leverage something that's right out of the Azure Gallery, like Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session with Office 365 already installed in it. I'm not going to do either of those things. What I've done is I've already created an image using that base operating system and saved it in my personal image gallery for my organization. So I can click on that and use my image, which has all these great other applications pre-installed, and go ahead and deploy. If you're familiar with Azure, when you go through the WVD deployment, you'll notice that there's this crazy setting that or setup that isn't in a regular VM deployment where I can provide domain admin account information. This isn't really a domain admin account. It's just an Active Directory account that's part of your on-premises Active Directory, if that's how you want to deploy it, that has the rights to join the account to Active Directory. The VMs need to participate in Active Directory so people can get access to stuff, and also so things like group policies can apply, so that the disastigs that are typically institutionalized in an organization through group policies will apply. And that's how we do it. We domain join the VMs as we roll through all this. We can also then set a local administrator account. We can even set a different organizational unit for the deployment so that we don't pollute our computer's container, but instead can create an OU that's specific to our deployment for WVD and apply different group policy objects to that. And I'll mention that as we go through. And that's basically the deployment. If I went to hit create and validate, it'd take about 10 minutes for these VMs to deploy, and then I'd be able to publish those out to the users. I talked a lot about Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session. So these VMs where users can attach and detach from the WVD VMs. One of the enablers for that is an application virtualization technology, FSLogix, that Microsoft acquired a little bit ago. MSIX App Attach, I mentioned, allows us to encapsulate application installations in a VHD, a virtual disk file. We've done the same thing for user profiles. So in the image that I showed you, I've installed the FSLogix agent that allows me to redirect end user profile information, including things like an Office 365 Outlook OST file, the activation files for Office 365 Pro Plus, and OneDrive files, and even the things that go on someone's desktop, and redirect them to a virtual disk file, a VHD file that can be stored on a file share. Oops, I clicked on the wrong storage account. What I've done is I created a storage account in Azure, right, that's connected to Active Directory, which is a little crazy. So this is storage as a service in Azure, and I've joined it to my Active Directory domain. What I've done also, and I'm just going to click back here, is I've created a file share. And I named that file share FSLogix because it's being used for these profile redirections. What happens when a user logs into one of those virtual machines is it goes to the file share that's configured in the registry for FSLogix, and it creates a folder that only that user can access. In this case, for WVD user, it includes the SID of the user and the name, and you can flip that around to make it sortable. And then it created a VHD file that has all the stuff that's specific to the user's profile. The benefit being that I'm reducing the overall I/O required in the virtual machines where I might have 20 users. I'm only using one file handle to access it, which is unlike what you might see using roaming profiles where hundreds or thousands of files could be replicated, moved around the network every time a user logs in. And it allows me to back up that profile. Now, I did this on Azure Files, but what we're seeing in this COVID era for the scale up is really not to use Azure Files, simply because Azure Files doesn't have the same sort of low latency that other offerings have in Azure. And instead, what I've done also is I've created an Azure NetApp Files account. Azure NetApp Files is a NetApp all-flash infrastructure that's integrated as a first-party service in Azure that also lets me Active Directory join this all-flash, high-performance, low-latency storage to my Active Directory environment, configure a capacity pool of a particular performance level. And I went low. I'm trying to be a good corporate citizen at Microsoft. I went with the least expensive, lowest performance version of it, which is still lower latency and higher performing than some of the other Azure offerings. And I created a 4 terabyte volume that I'm hosting profiles on. So that's this FSLogix technology is super awesome. And I'm just going to go back to the slide deck real quick, if that's okay. And again, just point out what the FSLogix containers are and reemphasize this. So one of the issues that we have when we take thousands of desktops and laptops off people's desks and centralize them into a data center is we've got to centralize all that I/O. And FSLogix lets us do that and do things that we typically couldn't do by backing up those profiles and redirecting them to VHD files, because user profiles can often be large and the sign in and sign out times can be unacceptable to our users. Mounting and using those profiles over the network eliminates those delays, right? And I'm gonna lean on my buddy Mark from NetApp to kind of pitch in here at some point. How does FSLogix manage that storage contention? Well, it again allows only or enables us to have a single file attached per user in these VMs, and then ultimately reducing the time and cost associated with the logon experience, making them happy, productive users, not like this poor, sad, frustrated user we see in the picture. Azure NetApp Files, as I mentioned, is kind of an interesting technology because it is NetApp flash storage that many agencies have leveraged on premises, and it takes advantage of NFS or SMB. In this case, for Windows Virtual Desktop, we're going to use SMB and provides the best performance for file shares that are available in Azure, and more importantly for DoD deployments has now received Impact Level 4, Impact Level 5 accreditation in Azure Government regions. So for DoD customers, they're very interested as a technology because they're familiar with NetApp already, and that Impact Level 4, Impact Level 5 accreditation means a great deal to them, as well as for civilian agencies as well. And it's one of those key enablers because storage is one of those complicated things from a Windows Virtual Desktop perspective that enables these large deployments that you can scale up and scale down. So because it's in Azure as well, if your deployment ends up, let's say we all get inoculated and you can turn off your Windows Virtual Desktop deployment in Azure, you can go ahead and start deleting stuff. You didn't invest in an expensive SAN on premises that you're stuck with for many years and have to figure out some other way to use it. You've got essentially the ability to scale down when you need to.